Previously on Featherstone Bicycles. So now that we have all of the individual parts and the part assemblies off of our Schwinn Continental II, it's time to move on to the next step, which would be cleaning those parts. And these are the parts we're going to start with. We're first going to soak the chain in some rust remover, and as well as the seat post bracket, and then this greasy part of the kickstand we're going to let soak in some solvent, and then we'll start removing the rust from the handlebars and the actual seat post as well as the kickstand. And that's what's happening on this week's episode of Featherstone Bicycles. So we'll start with the chain. The rust remover that I like to use is called Evapo-Rust. It's a kind of pricey for this gallon, but and you can find it at big box stores. But the cheapest place I found it is Harbor Freight. I don't know if they still have it. I bought this one a couple years ago, but you might want to check there. So I've poured some into this metal bowl here, and we'll let the chain soak in that for several days. The other thing I want to put into the Evapo-Rust is the bracket for the seat post. That's got some pretty heavy pitting on it, and we'll let that soak in the Evapo-Rust for several days as well. So back in the first episode, I had mentioned when I was taking the kickstand assembly off, and the last part that I pulled out was this little piece that's a triangle on one side and round on the other, and it's the last piece that goes in the back of the bracket that the kickstand assembly goes into. I mentioned that this piece holds the spring in place, and obviously I misspoke there, as considering that the spring is still attached. So the way that this assembly works is that this is the part that we put the wrench on to compress the spring, and so you'll see that it has a little it's a cylinder that has a groove cut in it, and that's the part that the little pin that I took out from the outside of the bracket, that pin fits into that groove, and that's what holds the kickstand then in place once you let go of the pressure on the spring. But inside, what's actually happened is, besides that spacer with the groove in it, is the spring, and then there's a washer, and then there is a pin that goes through the actual kickstand, and that is what is holding the actual spring in place. So to clean all this assembly, we're going to have to get that pin out. And again, there's a special tool for that. I'm not sure if it's the same tool that helps you get the kickstand out of the bracket, but in either case, I don't have either of those tools. So I'll show you what I do instead. The other thing about this piece is that you'll notice that it has some slots crossways on it, And what this piece actually does, as the triangular piece gets wedged into the triangular end of that bracket, is that when the kickstand goes in, this pin that is holding the spring fits in either one of those slots at the end of the pin. And what those slots do is they keep the kickstand either in a down position or in an upright position. So that's the purpose of that, and just as a correction to what I had in the first episode. So since I don't have the the correct tool, what I do is I got my bench vise here. I put towel over one end, and I could just put the end that has the slotted spacer at one end of the vise and this washer at the other end, and screw the vise down and squeeze the spring together. The problem is, especially when you're going to put this assembly back on, is that will tend to just move this part of this part of the assembly, the spacer with the groove in it, forward, and it won't really take the tension off this pin. So what I do is I put a towel on here in the back and get this wedged down as much as I can and get this part underneath this part of the vise, and then I start to put downward pressure on the kickstand. Otherwise it's going to keep on wanting to slide up because the kickstand is angled at this point. And then I can get this all pushed back, tap that pin out, pull it out, and then carefully let this tension release, or else that washer and spring can go flying and be a projectile, which we don't want to have. Next up is the solvent cleaner, which the one I like to use, a degreaser, is the Zepp Fast 505. You can also find this at any big box store normally. Put some of that in a glass jar here. And then I took the spring assembly off the kickstand here, and got the spring and this piece here. We'll let those soak overnight. Washer and the pin and whatnot. And then we can move on to cleaning up the rest of this. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for sticking with me, and we'll see you next week on Featherstone Bicycles.